When we have a contract, we want to break it down into as many specific performance obligations as possible. And then what we would do is allocate the transaction price based on each component's standalone selling prices. But what if we have a contract and we don't know the standalone selling prices of all of the performance obligations in that contract? What do we do then? If the seller can't observe the actual standalone selling prices, we should estimate them. GAAP allows companies 3 different approaches in estimating these standalone selling prices when we don't know what they would be. The customer doesn't sell that specific good or service on a standalone basis. And GAAP also says try to use these approaches in this order to the extent possible. So the first best option is called the adjusted market approach. And what we do is we look at maybe we don't sell this item on a standalone basis, but what do our competitors do? If anyone out there is selling this good or service, about what are they selling it for? And then we estimate, do we typically sell at about market price, maybe a little bit above market price, or maybe a little bit below market price? And let's look here at example 8A. O'Hara Associates sells golf clubs, and with each sale of a full set of clubs provides complimentary club fitting services. Now, it might be complimentary to the customer, but of course there is some sort of a cost to this from the company. A full set of clubs with the fitting services sells for $1,500. So we want to look at these 2 components. We have the actual clubs and we have the fitting services. We put them together and we're selling them for $1,500. Similar services are offered by other vendors for $110, and O'Hara generally charges approximately 10% more than other sellers do for similar services. Assuming the golf clubs and the fitting services are separate performance obligations, what would the standalone selling price be of the fitting services? Well, if the fitting services, we don't know what the clubs go for, but we're not asked for that. We're only asked for the fitting services. If other vendors sell them for $110 and we tend to sell them for about 10% more than that, all we have to do is just multiply 110 times 1 plus 10%. And we would get the estimated amount of the fitting services of $121. And from that, if we wanted to, we could back into the clubs, but we're not asked for that. We just want the market approach. The fitting services would be priced at $121. The second approach, GAAP says, if there is no readily available market price for this good or service being sold, then the next best thing to do is to do estimated cost plus margin. Determine what it costs you to produce that good or service, and then add a markup to it. Okay, so this was example 8A. Here we're going to look at example 8B. Okay, the golf clubs with the fitting services, they come together for $1,500. O'Hara estimates that incurs $60 of staff compensation, another cost to provide the fitting services, and normally earns 30% over cost. So we would take the $60 cost, multiply it by the markup, well, the 100% of the 60, so this is the same as saying $60 plus 60 times 0.3. Either way, mathematically equivalent. We get 30% of 60 is 18, and either way, this is going to come out to be 78. Okay, so in this approach, we would value the club fitting services at $78. Okay, now GAAP says if there's no market price, you cannot estimate the cost or the markup, then we use the residual amount. Assuming you can determine the values of everything else in the contract, whatever's left over gets plugged into what you can't determine on a standalone basis. So here is example 8C. We have same facts here, except O'Hara sells, now we know what the clubs go for. The clubs go for $1,400. We don't know what the fitting service goes for. We don't know the cost of it. We don't know what our competitors charge. Then all we do is simply take the difference, and that's the residual amount we would price them at $100. And let's take a look at one last example here. Video Planet sells a big screen TV package consisting of 60-inch plasma TV, a remote, and on-site installation. The installation includes programming the remote to have the TV interface with other parts of the customer's home entertainment system. The company concludes the TV, the remote, and the installation are separate performance obligations. The TV can be sold for $1,750. The remote is sold separately for $100. So these are the standalone selling prices. And the entire package is offered together for $1,900. The company does not sell the installation service separately. Other vendors charge $150. The company estimates it'll incur $100 of compensation, so the cost of producing it is about $100, and they charge about 40% over cost. Let's look at 3 different options. Estimate the standalone selling price of the installation service. Okay, under option 1, using the adjusted market assessment approach, what are our competitors doing? Similar vendors charge $150. So that's our answer for requirement 1. Requirement 2, expected cost plus margin. It incurs approximately $100 of compensation, and they typically have a markup of 40%. So under the cost plus margin approach, it would be valued at $140. And finally, the residual approach would say $1,750 for the TV, $100 for the remote. The installation is whatever then gets us to $1,900. So we've accounted for $1,850. So in the residual approach, it would be valued at $50. And before we conclude, let's just take a look, wrap up revenue recognition with just a few multiple choice practice questions. Which of the following is not a step used to apply the core principle of revenue recognition? A, determine the transaction price. B, identify the performance obligations. C, identify the contract with the customer. And D, ensure the sales price is fixed and determinable. Which one is not a step? Choice D is not a step. We have the 5 steps of revenue recognition: identify the contract, identify the specific performance obligations, determine the transaction price, allocate the transaction price to each performance obligation, and then recognize revenue as each performance obligation is satisfied. Next problem, Amber Company wrote a contract that involves 2 performance obligations. Product A has a standalone selling price of $100 and B has a standalone selling price of $200. The price of combined products is $240. How much of the transaction price would be allocated to the performance obligation for delivering product A? So what we need to do is think about each of these as on a standalone basis. A is $100, B is $200. The combined value would be $300. So contract A is $100 over $300, or 1/3, or 33%, and contract B is 67%. We're going to multiply that. For A is 33% of the whole contract amount. We're going to take 33%, multiply that by the contract value of $240, and we're going to get the answer of 80, choice C. Next, Citi enters into a contract offering variable consideration. The contract pays Citi $2,000 a month for 6 months of continuous consulting services. In addition, there's a 60% chance the contract will pay an additional $4,000 and a 40% chance the contract will pay an additional $6,000, depending on the outcome of the contract. Assume the company estimates variable consideration as the most likely amount. Most likely amount means that the Citi is going to expect to get the $2,000 for 6 months and the $4,000 for the bonus on the contract. What amount would be for the first month? Let's take our $2,000 for this, $2,000 per month, plus we would take most likely amount of $4,000, divide that by 6 months, and we're going to get the total amount of $2,667 each month. Okay, what if the company estimates variable consideration as the expected value? In this case, so we know we're going to have $2,000 a month fixed. We're going to add to that $2,000 a month. We're going to take the expected value of this bonus, 4,000 times 40%, plus, 4,000 times 60%, plus 4,000 times 40%. Thank you. And that's going to give us our answer that we see here. Answer C, 2,800. Last question, Amber wrote a contract that involves 2 separate performance obligations. We can't estimate the standalone selling price of product A. B has a standalone selling price of $200. The price for the combined product is $240. How much of the transaction price would be given for A? If we use the residual method, it would be the $40. And that concludes this video.